Shri Ganeshaya Namaha.
Om Shri Ganesh.
Saraswatyai Namaha. Om Namo Gurave Namaha.
Om. Oh, should I begin? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to everybody who's here and online. This is our final program of the weekend, the panel discussion. Sarah Mulukutla will be here any moment. This is always the challenge of having a small child. But she'll be here. She just called me, and she'll sit down and join us.
Plus, we're having a monsoon here, if you don't.
Yeah, that too. We're all soaked. But anyway, I wanted to open this in the same way that I began my first presentation the other night, which is to thank Shanta and Indira especially for the amazing job they did and dealing with inefficient people like me to make this happen. And it's been really a wonderful experience. I've heard from so many people from the ashram and how much they've enjoyed this intensive on both these topics together. So really, guys, thank you so much. And thanks to the ashram leadership, of course, for welcoming this and for making it happen. And all the people that have worked hard in the kitchen and everywhere else, and especially, of course, Seth, who always makes these things wonderful. And thank you. And anyone I'm forgetting at this point. So I don't want to forget that at the end when we're having our conversation. But I think the focus of the panel, which is really open-ended, so we don't really have an agenda that I'm going to list out, is primarily dialogue, not just between the four of us, but between all of us. And so we started with some questions. We started with some questions. We've explored the latest work on the brain and the mind and meditation. We've talked about how science and yoga can talk to one another more effectively. We've had a wonderful opportunity to immerse in the written and spoken form of Sanskrit all weekend. Lots of opportunities to meditate together in our programs in the morning. And good, Sarah's here. So we've sort of been moving this weekend toward a culmination where we can raise questions about what is most interesting, what's most confusing in what we've been talking about, and then beyond that, where should we go next? You know, what are really the areas that we should be exploring? Sarah yesterday said this, or the first night, I think, where she said that, you know, we don't even know all the questions we need to ask. And once we have all those questions that are clarified by these kinds of intensives, that can lead us to design the next study, the next experiment, to go more deeply. Because science and yoga share another thing, which is that they're cumulative. The knowledge of science accumulates through experiments and through follow-ups. And in yoga, it accumulates through practice, 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 and intensity. So we really want this weekend to end as it has begun, which is where do we find the best dialogue and what are the next best steps. But I think we were imagining that to begin, we could start with the questions of clarification or even agreements and disagreements. We're all here. There were questions online. Sarah and I started to address a few this afternoon. I think we can start there very explicitly, but then really open it up to the online and to the people who are here to kind of lay out their main thoughts and ideas. Several people have come to me even during the lunch and talked about questions that they had and are they appropriate for the meeting? And my answer was obviously yes. Every question is appropriate for the meeting and every idea is appropriate. So I think that's kind of where we wanted to start. And Sarah, you had suggested maybe we could start with the questions that we got at the end of our workshop, if that's okay.
Can I just start with
Please.
one little thing?
Yeah.
So many of you know, all of you know who are here, Guruji was a scientist. He was a neurosurgeon. I'm sure he's really happy right now about this going on here. It's like we're coming full circle to something that was bound to happen at some point. And now we're bringing the science of Sanskrit, coming right out of India and the East, with the Western science we've already seen how amazing it is, how it can help us, even without so much problems in ourselves, how much more it can help us by paying more attention. I just wanted to note that before we got started.
Yeah, it's always good to remember our teachers at the beginning. Thank you for that. So, Sarah, do you remember, and I think the first question might have been for you.
There was one on heart math.
Yes, I think that was the one I remember.
Okay.
Do you want to take that?
I can, sure. There was a question after the last panel asking if, I might, Seth, if you have them, I must ask you to reiterate, but it had to do with heart math that I remember, which is heart rate variability, biofeedback. And I can talk a little bit about that, and I think I'll be able to answer the question in this, but so heart math is a system where you place a sensor on your ear, and it tracks your beat-to-beat variability. And what you see is not your heart rate, but you see the change in your heart rate. So our body has a natural respiratory sinus arrhythmia, that when we inhale, our heart rate speeds up a little bit. That's because the expansion brings a little bit more blood in. As you exhale, it pushes the blood out and the heart slows down. This is an example of how dynamic our body is on a moment-to-moment basis. And if you have some stress or some emotional changes, your heart rate variability shows that. So the rhythm of the heart changes immediately. HeartMath has claimed to show some improvement in depression and anxiety by using this. They ask you to inhale and exhale for 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And I have actually tried to look at their science numerous times, but being fully honest, I have found their publications disappointing. And most recently, the cumulative one, which was the HeartMath team, was on the amyloid beta blood marker, where they actually did a randomized trial with younger and older adults and had them learn this heart rate oscillations. And I find their conclusions just to miss the point a little bit. But what I will say is that heart rate oscillations are modifiable. They are a mind-body dynamic. I think it can be a useful tool for individuals who benefit from seeing how their physiology changes. There was a recent study that found where in the brain controls heart rate, and I thought that was really interesting, actually. That one area, when they stimulated with magnetic stimulation, I believe, reliably brought the heart rate down. So they're finding that this is one way from the brain which you can control the heart rate. This is one tool in the whole picture of the mind-body dynamic. And in our experiment at Yale, I am using the HeartMath tool. I put the sensor on, and I do track heart rate variability as they do their baseline and their meditation. So I do use it. And but after this, the journal club, which I mentioned, where I felt that they were missing the marker with missing the mark with what they studied in the blood, I'd be happy to collaborate with them. I think there's a lot of potential, but this is an example of finding the right question to answer, and that really has to do with knowing the population that you're studying and understanding the intervention, the physiology. So that's my answer for HeartMath, for joy.
Can I add to the question
Yes,
a bit? So do you see it, if it does prove reliable, do you see it as potentially sensitive to short-term interventions?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, definitely. We ran one subject, and I saw a change in her.
That's right. In the
HRV.
variability.
We checked it, and I saw just calming her system. We saw some pretty, I think, relevant changes that happened as we calmed her brain. The HeartMath, we saw some improvement.
Yeah.
And I do think that long term, we need to study pranayama, and studying pranayama on heart rate variability. And blood pressure and biomarkers, I think, is actually higher yield than studying pranayama in the brain per se. We will see a shift in the network, but I think the long-term health benefits come from studying blood markers, metabolism in the body, leukocytes, and other blood biomarkers.
And you had mentioned yesterday or today, I don't remember, about pranayama in studying the effects of cortisol as well.
Cortisol, yes, absolutely. I would love to, yes.
Yeah.
I don't think I mentioned it, though, out loud.
It might have been our prep
discussion,
conversation.
But one of my interests, for anybody who's hearing this and wants to collaborate with this, that how you can use breathing, slow-paced breathing, to lower blood glucose. And the mechanism for that is cortisol, that when you enter into this relaxed state, you're going to secrete the cortisol, so there's a slight delay. But for those who are wearing the continuous blood glucose monitors, which are very common now, it's a great population to just see how you can control your cortisol with these, by putting yourself into a relaxed state. And that's another form of biofeedback. Biofeedback is anything that gives you feedback on your body physiology. So my one experience was an excitable person who got excited, and we saw the blood glucose skyrocket, and they were wearing a monitor. I said, hey, let's use this as an opportunity to practice some breathing. And it took maybe 30 seconds, maybe a little bit more, but then you saw it start to peak and then turn. The graph went down and started to go down while we were doing the breathing. And as she stopped the breathing, it kind of peaked and went up a little bit, but not to the prior. And so for me, that was completely new, but to see in real time, hey, this is another way we can impact physiology with these tools that we learned from,
that's an interesting
from this Eastern tradition.
Measure, yeah. And there have been a lot of publications on pranayama and its impact on stress response.
Probably.
Most of them were...
A lot from Indian journals. And
and on some of them, the methods are... But it certainly makes sense, given what we know from, our own experience with pranayama as a platform to enter meditation.
Yeah.
So one would imagine.
I'll conclude this section with just one comment, that we can learn how to use which technique to impact what pathology or what outcome. And that's what's exciting about the technology we have now and the collaboration. I think we can get more refined on learning how to best use these techniques that we have been graced to learn through our meditation experience, our exposure to the ashram.
Exactly, yeah.
That's the medical value, the future that we have.
So, and Gina, we had just the first question that was online had to do with heart rate variability and whether, and we're actually, Sarah's looking at that in the context of the study we're doing together.
And I don't know if Christian is here.
Christian's here, yeah.
Good. You heard that answer, right? We talked about that briefly.
Yeah, so that's all we've done so far. Was there another?
There was another. I had written down a few notes from the question.
And this is okay for now, for a few minutes? Okay.
So there was the question of the ethics of the science training, the meditation we're doing. I think you answered that.
I think I might have answered that. I don't know if I answered it, Seth,
Okay.
to the satisfaction of Kay
Estelle, yeah.
Estelle.
Okay. And the other question I think was, are we also including dispassion into this, into meditation? You know, we talked a lot about devotion,
Right.
but that's something you and I have talked about.
Yeah,
That a lot
we
of
were talking-
times, and in Buddhist traditions, there is a, I think also an emphasis on emptiness, on trying
right.
to remove attachment. And how does that then impact the brain networks, the heart physiology? The last question that I learned, that I wrote down, this was the one from Joy, so sorry if I misspoke before, but do you take into account the learning preferences of visual versus auditory
Oh.
or kinesthetic learning? You mentioned a little bit about how your experiment is trying to be individualized, but
Yeah,
that was a
no.
question.
So-
Okay.
So, I mean, with regard to the dispassion, that's, you know, especially before we put up the Vedanta, the Astanga Yoga, and the Buddhist and the Jain pathways from psychological soundness to deep meditation, that transition. And I think that some traditions more than others, particularly Jains and Buddhists, you know, are very much focused on letting all of the attachments go as a kind of a first step, really, and not clinging to things that are inherently transient and as in the Buddha would say, are dukkha, are ultimately pain because they can't last. And the Jains are very similar in their sense of non-clinging to passions. And of course, in the Astanga Yoga and the Vedanta tradition, there's also the transition to the state that doesn't connect to the mind, to the external. But I think there is this interesting variation in pathways within Vedanta, within the Hindu tradition, that allows different ways to get to the same point.
Yeah.
And just a few weeks ago, we had a visitor who came to, it was from Jayashree's Vaishnav tradition, and he came to the ashram and made a presentation on the power of bhakti when it's pure. And really that's a kind of a passion to lead to dispassion in so many ways. So it is interesting that the different schools approach this, of course, in different ways, and therefore fit different personality profiles. Some people might need to move into this from different perspectives. But one can certainly argue, Gina was mentioning it before, that when they talk about those higher states, compassion, maitri, insight, wisdom, and dispassion are common to all of them. So it's a good question. In terms of research, I haven't seen anything, to my knowledge, contrasting dispassion and bhakti, or except for the work on metta, which is really the loving kindness, which is very much maitri or karuna, and there's some science there, but I haven't seen anything on, you know, the sort of the neural twisted neighborhoods that you're going to pass through in a gyan versus a raja versus you know, the different approaches. How about you? Or you can.
I mean, we all acknowledge first of all, there's different paths. Truth
Right.
is one, paths are many. And there's different types of learning. And our goal ultimately is to match the learner with the right technique. Because there's just a myriad of solutions to a myriad of problems. And biofeedback in general is one way that technology may help us in this if an individual doesn't yet have insight. And my vision is for AI, maybe this can be done in a pod, that they can do some meditations and the AI pod can measure their muscle tone or tremor or blinking rate and tell them right away, you responded most to this when you did the devotion or the compassion. So I think we acknowledge that there's different learning needs. The traditional Chinese model also has the elements, right? Whatever element you are and how you can learn differently. So this is still early. There's so many applications.
That's a great point, and I might want to make a quick remark on neurofeedback, but let's turn to Indira, who is also going to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I think you guys are bringing up such a richness of material that I have sort of 8 things running in my mind for what I want to comment on. I think the 2 first things I'd like to lead with One goes back to something that Sarah said this morning, which was noticing that you can be essentially more centered than you were 5 years ago. And I think this is hugely valuable because it can be very difficult for us to see progress in ourselves. That's number one. And what I think about for people, as opposed to this healing modality of meditation and yoga, is I think of it very much, I am a physical therapist, long after I met this place, but both trainings impact me. And there's a phrase in physical therapy which is your rehab material, which means that you have got the physical, mental stamina to go to the next level of healing. And I feel like Guruji showed me that decades ago by giving me students, some of whom, there was one woman who was diagnosed schizophrenic, who lived here and got much better. And she was one of the students that was given to me when I was very, very young. And she could track on the Sanskrit, and she embraced it. And we watched her for 5-10 years become, to be very, in layman's terms, less crazy. So some of it, I think, is receptivity to healing, is a whole other subject in itself.
Yeah.
What Guruji would call, or one way to approach, is Ichha Shakti. You have to have desire. And I think that's true in many situations.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to speak to with what Sarah said is because, and what Ken said, is in terms of having meditated over decades and seen changes, I think of it not so much linear as, okay, I am less crazy than I was 20 years ago. There can be an element to that. But I've also seen my mind do deep dives in times of crisis, where I feel like I'm back to where I was, you could say. So I don't think it's progress in mental health or meditation or anything we're doing is necessarily linear. And what I think we're doing in this weekend is we're exploring tools, and we're looking at things that we can all reach for throughout our lives, including challenges of family life or professional life. And that brings up, we're all bringing up too many points perhaps at once, but some of this research has been done on monks. I think what the vast majority of us are people living in the world. So I think doing research on, you take an overstressed person, juggling, as most of us sitting here are, juggling work and family, and can they use these tools? And frankly, that's one of the things that I think is valuable about Sanskrit, is that you can sit down and do a little bit of this, and it helps switch your mind. It's sort of a concrete thing you can do to facilitate meditation, which was what our Guru said. Anyway, so now I've said too many things.
No, those are all. Indira, I just one quick thing on the monks so I think in the way that the literature, this explosion of work on meditation and brain, it began with the question of what's the end state, which is the monk or the deep, 60,000 hour person. How plastic is the human brain when you really, really, go deep into control? And I think that set a foundation. But most of the studies you see now are closer to what you're talking about. How do people who live in stress but get a few days of retreat change their stress response and their circuitry and things like that? So you're absolutely right. May I make just one? I'm sorry, I'm too much of an academic, but the question, Seth, that the person had raised had to do with visual learners, and we kind of went off into ways forward in the path, and I think that's maybe part of what they wanted. But just in case they were asking the question about how you can help kids or learners who learn in a more visual and this is in my field, in my day job, I suppose, this comes up. Are there different kinds of learners? And while in some sense individual differences are everywhere and there are different strengths and weaknesses, I must be very clear. The work that's been done to try to test these ideas about really different kinds of learners and how they are different in school and how they're different has not been impressive. And there are a lot of claims made about, I'm a visual learner, I'm a left brain learner, I'm a right, whatever it is. And most of that literature has been unconvincing at best, even though we still are drawn always, whether it's the study of meditation or Sanskrit or reading or ADHD, we're drawn to understand individual differences that are really substantial, and we know that no two people are alike. But just in case the question was on the visual kind of learners versus this, I must say that literature, at least in the context of education and clinical psychology, has been unimpressive.
That's impressive.
Good. Thank you. That's good.
And it may be true, by the way, that there may be these things. As scientists, we can only say the data is not convincing.
I'm going to buy this book because I have heard about it, but I've never read it. But it's called Earth or Water Child, Fire Child, which is based on the Chinese model. And so Stephen Cohen is a pediatrician, I believe, who has done a lot of work in this. So I'm curious to see how that overlaps, because I certainly use that model for actually in Parkinson's.
And again, I think it's especially for people online as well. I'm not saying that what the divisions of labor are in the way brains are develop and how individuals differ. And certainly some people are stronger in different skills. We're all different. Some are more musical. Some are more mathematical. What I'm saying is that there is a kind of a buzzword world of visual learners and non-visual learners. And that literature, I think, needs a lot of work, is all I'm saying. But the idea of individual differences, where science, especially cognitive neuroscience, is now going, is away from the average head, the average person, toward the individual variation. I think that's very promising. Anyway, I didn't want to go off too much into the academic answer, but I figured I feel obligated to at least respond.
Valid,
I would say that is not academic, because we are all going through life learning.
True.
And it's practical. I just discovered within the last year that this subject that I study the most, which is a manual therapy technique called counterstrain, when I first learned it, I was making spreadsheets and coloring them on the computer. What I realized in the last year is I'm better with a notebook. And I do my cognitive sorting in a notebook. And I can still use color highlighters or whatever, and I don't know that I don't have any idea whether it's about the handwriting or, I don't know why. It doesn't matter. But it's better for me. And I wanted to comment before I forgot on, you're talking about Buddhist and Jain approaches toward, sort of getting closer to enlightenment. One thing Guruji did many years ago, he would have us make up sentences in Sanskrit classes. And one of my sentences was, "The path of life is very strange," something like that. This was many years ago. And I knew all the Sanskrit for it, and in my mind, the verb was a straight line verb. It was linear. And when Guruji did the translation in the class, he did putty. He did around. He changed it to a circular verb, like that the path was twisty. And I think for tools there's sort of two things that I think of as Yoga Sutras and Bhagavad Gita offer us. And I am less familiar with Buddhism and Jainism. I've been exposed to a lot of stuff that went out of my brain. But I think of it as two things. How do we get enlightened, and how do we survive samsara?
pretty good.
Like basic questions, right? How do we
Absolutely.
make it through everyday life? Or as I sometimes say, how can I be a little less crazy?
Yeah, it's true.
But there's the thing about both those two texts, which are not ones I teach a ton, but they offer options. And it seems
That's
to
right.
me that yoga philosophy is rooted in diversity of approach.
Yeah.
And that's pretty brilliant. You know, the first one, Abhyasa Vairagya Abhyam Tannirodha,
There's many ways.
was Sarah was quoting. And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But then, you know, you get Ishvara Pranidhana Va.
Fadam, right.
So, and I wanted to speak from the point of view of being an older person, that I think it's not just about personality types, but that at different stages of my life,
Absolutely.
I have needed to bring out different tools. And that sort of, again, goes to that more circular idea of life.
No, I mean that I would just totally support that, because I think the complexity of the yoga system and the Vedanta and the Hindu system is beautiful in that you can enter wherever you come from and end up going, and you're going to, as you know, Vivekananda said many times, you know, you're going to end up in all of them at different points in life, of course. So I love the openness of that. You know, I'm married to a Vaishnava, and but the Jains are, you know, none of the approaches are one size fits all, to be honest. And when you go deeply into them, you can see the, you know, the focus on diversity of need at different points in meditation. But I think the yoga system does it beautifully, and the Gita, and particularly, and saying how one needs to be in order to get enlightened. But obviously they all share this goal, and what is that goal? I mean, to be able to see things as they are, whatever that means. To me, I always frame it as seeing reality as it is, unvarnished and unmediated by my mind. But I live in the mind to try to get there. Maybe it's a mistake, who knows? But
No, I think it just speaks to one of the reasons why these dialogues are so valuable.
Of
is
course,
there's such
yeah.
a great example of a jnani. You know, just
but I'm trying to learn to be a bhakti in my next life. You know?
We have a question over here.
We had a
Can we
question
invite-
here. Go ahead,
yes.
Susan. Susan. Yeah, and then we'll take that next, Seth. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi. I am a fledgling student of Ayurveda,
Ah,
and to know that 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, Ayurveda, the science of life, in its fullest form, encompassed every branch of medicine. So from toxicology to gynecology to ophthalmology to neurology and psychology. I also understand a lot of that literature is lost in the Vedas and also things destroyed from colonization. But I'd also be curious to understand what scholarship has come out of India, especially in recent years with development in neuroscience. I'm wondering if there's a different lineage, and are they already asking and answering these questions about how Sanskrit affects the brain and meditation?
well, Sarah, I think you should take on the Ayurveda. And just as a quick precursor, there is a growing cognitive neuroscience literature that comes out of India that is, at times, those of us who review it and look at it, there have been questions about methodology and things like that, but it is growing, and I think great stuff is emerging. But in terms of Ayurveda versus medicine, I mean, I think you or Indira should respond, of course.
I'll just say that we do have access to it. The scientific dialogue is international. So I do regularly see studies from India, and some of these questions have been brought up in publications from people of Indian origin, I would say, for decades. But it's not, there's a lot that we can do by building this, and I do think that even our collaboration has something really special to add, that you do need to combine in a very strong way strong scientific traditions and disciplines, which Ken brings, and his lab is incredible for that, with the wisdom that is being cultivated in a place like this. So.
That's a great. I'm sorry. in terms of Ayurveda,
Yeah, and
how do you
Ayurveda, yeah.
assess it as a doctor?
Yeah.
Or is that a relevant question?
No, it is a relevant question. I mean, I haven't dove too deep into it, but I probably am not too informed about it. But I have tried. I've tried, and it just hasn't grabbed me. So that's all I can say. That I'm uninformed, but not for lack of trying. I just have not found anything. In fact, I visited an Ayurveda center a year ago in India who was specializing in Parkinson's, because there is evidence of people with Parkinson's going for 6 to 8 weeks and emerging 90% tremor free. And they do too much of an individualized approach that it's difficult. It's not been studied. That's the answer. That I think what we're trying to do is really hone in on the methodology that can show what are the key points that we're trying to cure. So I've tried. I even visited Ayurveda Center.
I would mention on this front, Susan, that last winter, I think, December, I was in Malaysia lecturing at a university in the northern part, and they had a new medical school there in a hospital, and they had 3 wings, Western medicine,
yes.
Ayurveda, and Chinese
wow.
medicine, and they were doing some very interesting studies with the crosstalk. So I know there are a lot of people working on that. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry. Yes, Seth.
So we have a comment and a question from Joy Goebel, who has been with us all weekend, very engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Her comment is, thank you all for your responses and increasing our understanding. Heart emoji, prayer emoji. And her question is, there is a book on the 5 love languages that if you speak your partner's love language or make the attempt, your relationship has a better chance to last. Any credibility or data to share on this topic?
I have no idea.
I mean, it sounds like entrainment. Sounds like, I mean, the neurologic correlate would be entrainment, that if you connect with somebody, then that's a positive thing. So I would believe it. But.
Maybe Jayshree and I are going to read that book after 40 years marriage. No, sorry, go ahead.
40th anniversary retreat.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it. It's a great question, but I don't know. Go ahead, John.
Talking about what comes out of India,
we
have a very dear teacher in Guruji, Dr. Ramamurthy Mishra.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear you.
Oh, do you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
turn it,
Our Guruji, right out of India, bringing us the science of all kinds of things.
Keep the microphone closer.
Thank you. I'd like to read a little bit from him, what he has to say about some of this.
Excellent.
Just to bring him into the room a little bit. You can see TV, listen to radio, read the newspapers. You can observe the world's history. One thing is common in the past, present, and future throughout the planet. Wherever there is a war in any form, whether guerrilla warfare, religious war, political war, individual, domestic, social, national, or international war, hijacking or airplane bombing, the cause behind it is the untrained and undisciplined mind and heart. In this condition, what can be done? What is our duty and responsibility? Should we silently watch? What should we do to try to prevent these wars, calamities, and catastrophes? You cannot change the human mind, but you can change its contents. When mental contents change, then our hearts automatically become the divine center of unity. Here by change, I mean transformation of the mind through Sanskrit, because Sanskrit is the cosmic language, the language of unity. Sanskrit is the mother of all languages. We have the English language and other modern languages for political and business purposes. Now we need a divine language to unite our hearts and minds for world peace. Due to modern scientific inventions and discoveries, the whole planet has become like one house. But our minds are still primitive, disunited. The thinking mind is the automatic problem-making machine. When an individual does not resolve his or her own problems, and the problems become domestic. If the family and house are out of order, then naturally the whole society becomes lawless. Therefore, to avoid chaos and confusion, we must discover the center of unity in our own hearts and minds. Almost done here. Every problem originates from within. Countless subtle problems lie deeply rooted in the unconscious mind. We cannot solve these problems because the untrained, undisciplined mind is the problem maker. Therefore, we need to raise the contents of our hearts and minds from lower to higher spiritual plane through Sanskrit, which vibrates deep layers of the psyche through pranic vibration. Sanskrit is the way leading toward perfection and unity. And closing, chanting Sanskrit, listening to authentic Sanskrit chanting with a quiet meditative mind, and studying Sanskrit grammar will stimulate automatic and spontaneous psychoanalysis, psychosynthesis, and psychotherapy. Sanskrit is quantum healing for the body and mind. Therefore, in addition to modern languages, we need Sanskrit, the language of the heart and unity, the language of integration. Our life needs all modern languages for multiplicity, while we need Sanskrit as the means for unity.
Wow.
And I must comment that last night after fire ceremony and meditation, Bharati read that. She chose the same, some of it, but a good part of it, a fair amount, to emphasize how the Guru saw Sanskrit as a vehicle and something very special.
Very good.
I probably have read this 100 times over the years,
it's
and
amazing.
each time there's something more powerful about it.
It's very relevant.
This was addressed to an Indian audience.
You can repeat that, son.
Yeah, repeat her comment.
Oh,
She's just, Bharati was giving context to this, that it was addressing an Indian audience, this particular
Right.
series of remarks.
right.
This was great.
But-
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you for reading it, because I'd love to
Very
hear
powerful,
kind
yeah.
of the big picture view
Scott, did
for
you wanna-
everything we've accomplished. Yes.
First of all, I have to thank all of you because it's,
A little bit closer to the mics. Yeah,
thank you. I want to just thank all of you. It's been an exciting weekend.
More closer. You
It's been
Yeah,
an exciting
that's
weekend
better.
of expansion. So one of my thoughts this weekend was on Guruji's meditations on different parts of the brain.
right.
And which one of them is kind of meditation and directing, you're going into meditation and you're feeling the different parts of your brain. So that's kind of like what we've been talking about of directing versus non-directing. Then all the years that he spent where he would chant Om, or he'd go Ah, Oo, Ma, and he would, you'd feel the different places in your body where the vibration is, which is just reminding me of the Sanskrit alphabet that we've been doing this weekend, and just the aspect of, going inside and feeling it. Feeling the ah, feeling where it is in the throat, feeling, the oo, the I, the ma, and just feeling it in the brain and feeling it in the body. So I just wanted to acknowledge that aspect of Sanskrit and the brain work that you guys have been sharing this weekend. And then I wanted to just share for a moment, Sarah, I think you were showing that slide on anxiety, and I was connecting to the loss of religion and extended family in our society, and the loss of a sense of connectedness that people have, we all have, whether you want to call it connectedness or you want to call it love, and feeling like spent a lot of my life working on that sense of connectedness within myself. And matter of fact, I was thinking, and all these different things go into the science of connectedness. And what our youth and people are missing are the tools for feeling connected. And and then the natural thought to me is connectedness from what you're saying when we have gamma waves. So is the science of connectedness to get into gamma consciousness? And is gamma consciousness located in the brain, or is it located throughout the body, or does it even transcend
right.
the
I was going to
body?
mention you.
So, and let me see if there's one more.
That's a good one, Scott.
And then just the powerful concept of mind wandering, which is actually all of us walking around with lack of gamma waves, or and all the different tools that are available to get, whether it be pranayama and all the other things for I'll leave
Thank
it to
you.
you guys now.
No, thank you.
Those are great. Well, I guess I could start with, and Sarah and I were talking about this morning, so it's very apropos. So the study of the brain, like we're doing upstairs, a lot of the work that's done looks inside one brain and tries to map it, as we're doing, to look at the mind-body connections, to look at the neurochemistry, et cetera, within me and separate from you. But one of the most exciting areas of brain imaging research, I would say in the last 10 years, and colleagues of mine and now Sarah's are sort of pioneering this work, is the study of how two brains become related to one another using brain imaging. I mentioned it the first night, but I mentioned 1,000 things probably. Let me unpack this for a minute. So this is called, they refer to this as entrainment, okay? So Scott, you and I would be sitting in a lab with two of these devices, or a version of these, and talking to one another. And as two New Yorkers, I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, you know, I'm talking to you. Nobody's listening, especially me and Scott. We just like to talk. Okay, but let's imagine we're listening just for a second. Okay. So Scott says something to Ken, and Ken says something to Scott. And it's really fascinating. If we understand, like we're speaking the same language, or we have some parity, we have a common understanding, one of the things that you see is that the activity in the parts of my language system that are producing the statement I'm making, and the area, this is Broca's and Wernicke's if anyone cares, and the area in your brain that is receptive and understanding it, we can see the brain activity becoming correlated. So that communication, parity, involves that the two oscillating brain systems become correlated in those oscillations. And in the same way, your Broca's and my Wernicke's are coming into sync. And there's a growing literature on this for a number of reasons. One, to understand what my colleague Joy Hirsch has referred to as the social synapse, the connection between two people is a kind of the, and to understand how our brain is never operating in a vacuum. It's never operating in a cone of silence. It's always interacting. It's always being affected by and transforming itself based on communication. One other thing quickly, just very quickly, but is illustration. One of the original studies was done by a group in Princeton years ago, Uri Hassan, that established this. And here's what they did. They had people, if you're using the devices we have, the NIRS, you can have two people with caps and they can talk to one another, and we can study the degree to which they become entrained. And by the way, just one other thing on that, if somebody has problems with communication or somebody has a lack of social connection with other people, then that entrainment will not occur. So this entrainment, this correlation between two brains, is a really sensitive measure of, Joy's data suggests even to risk for autism and things like that, where there's that social disconnect. So this is kind of where the field's going. And there's some work from this group in Princeton, and what it established is that if you have one person telling a story in, let's say they speak two languages, so English and Hindi, and you look at their total brain activity over time as they're producing their message about something, and then you bring someone else in the scanner and they listen to the story, and they may not, let's say they speak English but not Hindi. So what happens is, if they understand the story, they speak the language they speak, their brain activity and the one from the speaker become really similar, hard to disentangle. And to the degree it becomes similar, that's how much they're likely to understand the story. But if they're listening to a story in a foreign language, of course, they don't understand it and the brain does not become correlated. So what does this all mean in English? It means that as we now look at understanding the brain, we no longer look at it in my head alone, we look at it in a social context. And the last comment, it's quite interesting. There was a study that came out of NYU, and this is relevant to my work with children. We're beginning to look at these issues. They put caps on a whole bunch of kids and their teacher in a classroom. And they're looking at the communication of the teacher and the student. And they're looking, it was a preliminary study. This is David, what's his name? We know his father, anyway.
Okay.
Dave, so he's a well-known professor, but he and his lab put these kind of caps on a whole bunch of people. And what they were looking at is the ways in which the children who were engaged were coming into this synchronized state. So last thing, we all know when we sit in a room of deep meditators, we always feel a stronger meditation, and I think it all has to do with this. So yes, it lives in the gamma or elsewhere, but it's basically, we are not just simply an organism. We live in something larger than ourselves, and the social neuroscience is getting very interesting. Sorry for the long answer.
I'm not meaning connectedness to other people. I'm only totally meaning that connectedness that you feel with yourself.
Okay.
That
That's
connectedness
interesting.
that is inner joy, inner peace.
Okay, never mind.
contentment. So that's the science of connectedness that I'm talking. The connectedness where you feel whole, you feel complete.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the gamma waves that I was understanding.
Of course.
And the
So
state
you
of-
weren't asking about the interaction?
No, I was talking about the state of connectedness where we grow up and feeling like something's missing, or you're trying to do your connectedness
sure,
through other people or through experiences in this life. I need another experience to make me feel connected.
Right.
Because we are not grounded in the fact that we are connected to our own being. So that, and I thought connected to our own being
Of course.
means we're firing off on our gamma waves. So, or we have the ability to not be stuck in mind wandering. We have the ability to go
course.
back and forth, something like that.
And Sarah, you should take this part. So I hope that answer to what I thought was Scott's question is still relevant to the group, which is how we are entrained.
I just want to comment that I don't care how it came out. I'm really glad you repeated that about entrainment, because I think you explained it a little more fully than it was explained before, and it is absolutely fantastic.
It's exciting stuff. It really is, yeah. But Scott, to your point,
I interpreted it also as a connectivity, but because you brought it in the context of increasing anxiety and depression, and yes, one could see it as a lack of connectedness to this inner well-being, but I'm sure that among teenagers, that the lack of interpersonal connectedness is also contributing to that. My response was that it's not just the brain, it's the whole body physiology changes. Entrainment happens in heart rhythms and heart rate variability and hormones. You know that women who come together start to menstruate together. I don't know if we've checked cortisol, but I'm sure that cortisol, prolactin, I'm sure it just, and that's what's incredible, that it operates as a whole. And I'm sure that this digital disconnect is driving anxiety because of lack of that, and individualism.
Yeah, so it is,
as you mentioned, single generation. Who mentioned single generation
Yeah.
living? We're lacking this communal. This is impeding the body's ability to self-regulate because of this social disconnect.
yeah, no, and I mean, yeah. So when it comes to connection, though, between two people, we have we do work on the vocal tract at Haskins, and so there was a study done there, so not looking at the brain, but looking at the articulation, the production of speech. And you can see that when people speak with different accents, over time, they get closer to one another, and they're not aware of this. Their body is changing the vocal pattern in order to become understood. So as Sarah said, everything we do is in a social context. I know.
Yes.
So so in the science, Scott, the science of somebody going into the state that Sarah mentioned with the elevated gamma in those monks, or if you look at some of the work on deep non-dual awareness that's beginning to get published, where you see essentially a state that looks not like waking, not like dreaming, not like deep sleep, and not like coma, but like something else at a global level, that state, which is associated with samadhi or one-pointedness or even deeper states, that has been mapped, and it is associated with certain EEG signals, as Sarah taught us yesterday, but it's also associated with the quieting of some networks and the amplification of others.
And I would say you need this meaning, the context of it,
Right.
the spiritual component of it, and that's a little bit what you're referring to. Yes, I think that when you feel that wholeness, it is a positive brain state, whatever it is. But actually, coming back to heart math, they signify that as coherence. That at the same time, you're going to have the heart rhythms and the brain rhythms operating in a most optimal state
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott, for raising all that. Christian? Oh, did you want to add? Okay.
I had a question about the entrainment. If anyone has looked at doing the brain imaging and at the same time looking at the microfacial expressions or eye tracking, because I could imagine,
Yes.
what I would love to see is if I'm talking to Ken and without brain caps, and I could imagine in the future that my phone is in my pocket and says, oh, looking at Ken's face, he's zoned out, he's not listening to you
Exactly,
anymore. There's
yeah.
no entrainment.
Yeah.
And so it's of course much easier to look at someone's
Yeah.
microfacial expressions than at the cap. So is
Right.
anyone doing?
Yes. Yeah. So, as Sarah said too, entrainment is one brain-body complex interacting with another one. That's why I mentioned that even if you study the micro control of the articulators, the way we produce speech, that if you spend a few minutes with somebody with a very different accent, like you and I initially, our accents will converge unconsciously. Our facial expressions will reflect all of these things. And obviously, as Sarah mentioned, there are many physiological processes that become correlated with, but the brain measure is pretty exciting. Eye tracking, it can be used, and there's a group I know in New York, Child Mind Institute. They have some technologists who are trying to plug stuff in where you can get them all at once and look at children. This is child psychiatry, and you're looking at children to see if they're responsive. Even the vocal quality, the acoustic signal can tell you something about their state of mind and their social state. So that the stuff you're asking about is a hot topic, and eye tracking and real-time eye tracking and face expression with a cell phone is where things have gone. So on the nerd side, it's very interesting. So thank you, Kristen.
So I've had two different senior physical therapists almost break down crying, talking about the importance of training facial muscles, because this is something that insurance companies will not pay for often.
Yeah.
And the reason these sort of hardened professionals were so emotional about this is they talked about how incredibly isolating it is if someone has an injury to their facial muscles, that they get somewhat, well, isolated for sure, but almost shunned because people unconsciously look at them as there's something wrong with that person.
That's right.
Because their face muscles
They're
aren't
not-
doing
yeah,
what they
yeah.
expect in terms of communication. So I mention that because part of what we're talking about this weekend is visual versus oral. And in terms of Sanskrit, the Sanskritic tradition was for thousands of years, everything was handed down only orally. And we are now, for quite a while, printing has come up, and I feel like Guruji gave us permission to use everything.
Yeah.
And we try to teach with everything and try to match it to different people. But similarly, you talked about, I have seen with people I've known who weren't deaf, and then they became a little more deaf,
Right.
and how isolating that is. So as human beings, we are really programmed, you could say, for using all our senses.
Right. And even the study of speech communication, there's a great deal of research on how understanding somebody's speech involves watching their micro movements of the facial musculature. That's why if you hear somebody, there's a really cool experiment you can do where you have a sound like somebody saying ba, and And you're looking at the face, and the face, in normal speech perception, we hear and we see, and then we combine them. And that seeing the face helps us to be more precise, because the auditory signal is sometimes noisy. So if you set up a situation where somebody is saying ba and their face is saying ba, then it's ba. But if you set up a situation where it's a trick, a harmless trick, but they're hearing ba, but the face is saying something else, then they'll swear to you that they're hearing a third sound. It just shows that we hear, we learn, we do language with everything we have, and these are old, cool kind of tricks of understanding communication, but they come back in a situation like this, as you're saying, Indira, that we learn with everything that we own, and we have permission for that. But it's the human communication system is really fascinating in that way, Anyway, just an aside.
The social thing that you talked about is so cool. And you can think about it in terms of, I think most of us in any public speaking, we were talking about this with somebody earlier today, it is very valuable to have an audience, to make eye contact. And many of us feel like if we see a friendly face in the audience, it's a whole lot easier to talk.
Yeah, it is.
And that's another, I don't know if that's a kind of entrainment. I don't know if anyone's done sort of, what you're talking about is one-on-one, and it's absolutely, totally cool. I don't know if it's been done on a bigger group.
I know there was a lot of complaints that teaching or giving lectures during COVID, where you have no feedback, and I did a lot of it, is a disaster. Well, but I know of no evidence.
But also the debate a couple of days ago, that one of the comments that I heard was that there's no audience there, so the people are talking, and that could have been a little bit constrictive to what we saw as lack of expression for Biden, and just some concern there. But the fact that he had no audience, he had no one to connect to. He was speaking to just one moderator without that encouragement from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Chaitanya.
Well, I want to thank all of you for everything you're doing. Everybody in this room is a teacher in some way, shape, or form, and I'm really grateful for that. My question is, how do we help you? Because most of us here are meditators and are studying Sanskrit. And I ask that because I specifically started TM having read some of the studies on PTSD, anxiety, and the amygdala. So you're doing the research on it now. How do we help you more than just getting the research out? And how do we tie that in with the Sanskrit and the Western medicine and psychology principles? And that's what we're here, East-West, Sanskrit, medicine, music, all of it is working for me. So how do we help you further with all of that?
This is a great point to transition to that. How can we get value added by bringing these together, and where can we go next? I think we should all respond to this. Indira, do you want to start?
Well, first of all, you have both said a lot of absolutely fascinating and, brilliant things all weekend long. My favorite 15 minutes was somewhere in this morning's talk, and it alluded to different belief systems. I don't even remember completely what you said, but it had me thinking, as I have thought. Our 11-and-a-half-year-old grandson gave a speech at his 5th grade commencement where he alluded to his anxiety really getting sparked in COVID and the last few years he'd had with fighting panic attacks. And his family tradition is Christian. And what I've wondered about, we're talking in this context, you brought this up, Ken, maybe 2-3 years ago. You brought up the challenge of bringing philosophy into mindfulness research. And where I think that, I don't know, this may be off the subject, but it will self-correct as we continue discussing. What I was thinking about since what you said this morning is the first place I was introduced to meditation was an ecumenical 10-day retreat given by Swami Satchidananda's organization. They used to do them frequently. So there was a Jewish rabbi, there was a Swami, there was a Christian monk and a Christian brother.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody spoke on meditation. And it was a wonderful 10 days. And I think the other piece that was meaningful for it, Guruji gave me one time Radha Krishnan's translation of the Upanishads.
Mm.
And that is continually footnoted there, many Upanishadic verses with Christian mystics.
Mm.
And I think I know what it was. Ken, you brought up life.
Mm.
And that's something Guruji used to talk about. And I don't have a great quote of Guruji's, but he used to say meditation is not just when you sit quietly, but it's how you live your whole life.
Yeah.
And that seems to me to bring in some of what goes beyond just the mindfulness work, but the approach to life, which wonderful slides on Buddhist approach versus Jain approach, and even so anyway, I think this is one field of inquiry where it can be, we can draw some threads together, would be interesting.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that I don't understand what you talked about is how the metta meditation works. Like, how do you do compassion meditating? And so now, having digressed in 5 directions,
No, that's a good one.
I'd like to hear more about how that was done and how it was measured, because that seems to me to be not just approach for how to reach a higher state of meditation, but it ties in with the living in the world
Yes,
and
it does.
how we treat each other,
Yeah.
which is the social thing.
Sarah, you familiar with yeah, I think Sarah knows this.
I'm sure, yeah. I'm just wondering which question to answer, because we've digressed from.
Well,
so
we
I also
can
have an
keep
answer
Chaitanya's
to,
question
keep it
in the
mind.
back
Yeah, I have an answer.
for a
Yeah,
moment
sure.
and come back to it, yeah.
So compassion meditation, I teach through Sharon Salzberg's, what she is the Insight tradition, which I think she has really promoted. I believe she's really the core that brought it from the East here. But she gives prompts. It's really 4 prompts that you can say to yourself, and it opens the mind and the heart to a state of being present for other people's happiness. But the prompts are, so the way that it works, I'll lead you through it because it's easier. So I invite you to close your eyes and get in your meditation posture. But you start by imagining somebody who you don't know very well. It could be someone who you've briefly said hello to here but don't know anything about. Picture them in your mind and repeat these phrases silently towards them. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May your heart be at peace, free of any stress. And may you have a joyful day. So you emanate these wishes of just purely somebody else's well-being. The next phase in this exercise is you have to picture someone who you love, someone who you know very closely, and picture them in your mind and emanate these same wishes to them by silently repeating in your mind and in your heart, may you be happy. May you be healthy. May your heart be at ease, free from stress. May you have some joy in your day today. And for this prompt, I encourage people to take it one step further and say, may I play a role in your happiness? Right now you're picturing someone who you love, who you have close relations with. So keep that in mind. If you ever have a disagreement or an argument, enter it from how can I help you feel happy today? The third step, and I'll move a little bit quicker, is picturing someone who you actually have some contention with. It could be your boss at work or someone that over time there's just been some conflict, maybe unresolved, maybe really long-standing, that you still hold something. And you picture them and send well wishes to them. They're also just trying to be happy. We all are. So may you be happy. Picture them in your mind. May you be healthy. May your heart be at ease. May you experience some joy today. The final step is to picture yourself. Keep a picture of yourself in your mind's eye and say to yourself, may you be happy. May you be healthy. May your heart be at ease, free from from some stress. May you experience joy today. And take a moment now. Let's all just take a moment in silence and look inward and see, is there anything that you can do to truly make your being happier today? That's self-compassion. That's recognizing that when we're in a state of peace, we can bring that outward. So let's just stay here for a moment and everybody look inward and maybe make a commitment. Does your body need nourishment or sleep or rest or exercise or a hug? Just check in. Okay. So that's the exercise that that I do teach people, and
you find that effective with your patients as well?
You know, I teach a range of exercise in my it's in my core meditation course.
In the core,
to make sure that I mention it as one technique, and I think it's very important for people with Parkinson's when you deal with illness. Yes, I think that's definitely one technique that can help people get out of their self. They're just instead of worried about their caretaker, that their caretaker's not. You know, people who have advanced debility, I think that's an excellent tool. But plus that relationship between in a couple, if one spouse gets sick with Parkinson's, having a positive relationship just has a huge, tremendous outcome. Because if it becomes stressful or strained, then it worsens everything. So working with couples to just keeping just compassion for the other being as part of their primary centering approach to caretaking.
I thought that was amazing. I mean, as we were envisioning what you were talking about, I had connections with people, envisioning them and feeling like there was some synapse going on that changed things right then and there. I mean, it was, if you can share that at some point, an email for the group. I don't know how we're going to do that.
Sure, I have a meditation. I have an audio recording of that I'm happy to share. But did you guys all feel it in your heart also? You know, it just changes the physiology. That's right then and there.
The only thing I would say, that was so wonderful. The only thing I would say for me with my brain, and you were doing it really fast.
Yeah,
so that's completely different.
Time. Yeah.
When it came to self-healing, I wanted just to stay with well-wishing myself. And if I went to analytical, what do I need? It's like, oh my God, my analytical brain just...
Okay, good feedback,
It needs to not engage. And I know you were doing it quickly. But if I do it on myself, I'm not going to ask those questions. I'm just going to give myself the blessing.
Different strokes for... Come on up.
Yes, please.
If it's okay.
Yes. Please,
Metta meditation is part of my daily practice.
Okay.
So, and I learned from like the Insight tradition, where one of the sayings is like the insight, the more mindfulness sort of meditation. It's like two wings of a bird, and you need the metta, and you need the more silent contemplation.
Right.
And a bird without the two wings isn't really going to work. And all of my training has been to start with the self and then go outward. Oh, sorry.
Exactly what I was
And so I have led meditation groups for a while too, and that's always like the sticking point, and people have a really hard time with it. Come
So, Purnima, let's add to this.
I got this message from Roy Eugene Davis back in the 70s in one of his books, and he talked about in visualizing light. When you're dealing with somebody and you're having difficulty with them, visualize white light or yellow and blue and green. He used a lot of light, but he said first you have to visualize it around yourself. And once you give yourself the light therapy, then it's so easy and almost no problem to put the light around somebody else. So he always said start with yourself, which makes...
I learned the metaphor of a cup. and the teachers often come back to the cup when
Makes sense.
when you have that like the self, I can't do it for myself, because people feel like, oh, I'm being selfish. That you fill up the cup and then the cup pours over.
Over, yes, of course.
Yeah, but at this point in my, like, I really just focus on myself. I do.
But you find
exactly what you're saying.
this is an effective tool for you, this
It's
meta.
amazingly effective. I just slide it in between my, like, the invocations I say
Right.
in my daily asana practice, and then the actual asana practice itself.
Okay. Well, thank
So,
you for clarifying
yeah,
that.
thank you. And
I think I must have learned from the
Chaitanya-
self-compassion institute, and I'm not sure how I got those instructions backwards,
So
but I've been
I'll
teaching
tell
it
you,
that way for
The phrases
since I began.
I use
Yes.
are, may I be free from danger, which just
Oh, yeah, I've seen
aligns
that.
really nicely, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
very
very
good, like in a PTSD context too.
Right.
What did
So,
you say about danger?
may I be free
Free
from
from
danger.
danger. May you be free from danger.
May I be mentally happy. May I be physically happy. May I have ease of well-being. And it's the ease that I had the most trouble with
Yeah.
in the early years of it too, because I'm like, if something's hard, then it's like worthy, and like ease is for stupid people.
Yeah.
I know that feeling. Thank you.
I would just comment on that last one, that I think for me, the way Sarah led us is more effective, perhaps, and I'll
I think
play
for
with
my
it.
audience also.
I think I need to, as a sort of caregiving type of a person, I can like practice sending out good energy to other people, and then have an easier time doing it to myself.
Before we move on, I want to look at, I mean, I think we have to target also, I think for my audience who are completely new to meditation, I mean, this group is very experienced, so maybe the fact that you could even send well wishes to yourself is a state that you are very connected to, this inner dynamic that's happening. But I'm really curious now at the origins, though, from Buddhism. My understanding was that it's, so first of all, this from a scientific perspective, the point that we can generate emotional states at will, not just gamma waves and thinking or cessation mind, but that it's a valid investment of time to intentionally generate positive emotional states, and that connects with the heart math approach very well too. But secondly, I'm just really curious, because my understanding for Buddhist monks that they just practice it so much more for other people, so I don't know that role, the dynamic. So I'm curious from the traditional literature. That's all. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I can explain it quite correctly to Sanskrit scholars here, but I believe it comes from sankalpa, which is intention, if I'm not mistaken, because I started doing this a couple of years ago with I am safe, healthy, to overcome. It's using the right language as opposed to I want to be safe. Right. I am safe. And that came to me somehow through Sankalpa. I'm not sure how. But this year on my birthday, I added I am happy for happy birthday, safe, healthy, and decided to add wealthy to that as well. But I do believe, and wealth is spiritual wealth, not just material, but we don't deny that either. Right. But I do believe it comes from that, with Buddhism coming from Hinduism, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. But it was a big change for me to start with that, because like you, Inder, I was always outward trying to help other people versus helping myself. And it took a lot of programming, like really saying it over and over to convince myself with wealthy versus just prosperous or more successful. And I had... It took a while for me to reprogram myself to get to that state of being able to say it just naturally, and when I needed it, if I didn't feel safe or happy, just wait, go back to that, just tell yourself you're happy, and program yourself into it. But, yes, that
so, Chaitanya, I think I want to add one brief remark to your original question, which is how can we help? So, we've had a lot of perspective on that question. I think really great answers. The only thing I would add is what I talked about this morning, which is that in the biomedical world, there's a tendency to study meditation techniques, and they're very effective, or can be effective, but we know that in order to really rewire the brain in some fundamental way, we need to go more deeply into the holistic approach of the psychology of meditation, of the mindfulness of meditation, of the gyan of it, whatever it is. And so the place I think you, as experienced meditators, and as a community of experienced meditators, can help the most is by allowing us to explore, as research is just beginning to do, this more life-focused thing. Sarah talked about it too, that, it's not just, doing something 20 minutes a day. It's about transforming your sense of self. So all the things that go on every week at the ashram that are focused on self-transformation at many levels would be a great thing to explore with these technologies and these tools, because a lot of the research out there isn't quite here yet, and I think you could help us go to the next level. That's what I was mentioning this morning, and that's my response to your question. I think each of these are important aspects. And I just asked one thing on the metta, and then it started earlier with the question of passion and passionlessness. So it is really clear that there are different ways of being. Certainly in the tradition I was trained in, the passion of ahimsa, nonviolence, is this high state, and there's not much discussion of karuna, of love, but rather non-injury. This is a Jain approach. And it's very appealing as you try to peel away the things you cling to. And that's one approach to that emptiness or stillness that we all seek. And at the same time, in Buddhism, I've always felt that there's more focus. Of course, it's ahimsa, but it's also karuna. It's also soft heart. It's not that the Jains don't have this, they do. And Gina knows this, Maitri and karuna is part of the, but in terms of the deep meditation, there are differences. So I think there are different kinds of people. But I think probably, as you were mentioning, Gina, as people go deeper and deeper, however they get there, they end up in a very soft-hearted place. And I think I've never been felt the connection to metta, but maybe I should in my old age.
We have a question.
Yeah, question
Ken.
over here. Yep.
So we have a question from YouTube and a question from myself. Earlier today, you and Sarah were talking about rising anxiety levels amongst the younger population, and you're studying meditation techniques as an antidote to that.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if you've had any interaction with the professor Jonathan Haidt at NYU, who's the preeminent social psychologist on this very issue.
Right.
But he focuses primarily on the internet and the delaying of social media as his curative.
Right.
But I think there might be an opportunity here for a collaboration of introducing meditation techniques with his research.
Yeah, I think he's well known for the work he does on creating a more healthy way of interacting with the internet and with the world, among other things. And it's certainly a natural place. He might even do some of that, I'm not sure. But are you familiar with Haidt's work?
Not really. I mean,
Or
I'm familiar with some of
Indira
those
Shanti?
recommendations, but I didn't know his name.
Yeah.
I'll forward you some stuff, but I think that there's a good opportunity for synergy here, because he doesn't focus on meditation. He pretty much is strictly about delaying access to social media and about increasing risk-taking for children so that they could live a more natural, organic life. So anyway, that...
it raises an interesting thing, though, Seth, which is in the wide array of academic and medical and research silos that we live in, there are many different approaches often to the same problem, and sometimes there's a tendency for us not to be able to look outside those silos. And I think one of the things that's most promising in modern science and current science is the emphasis on interdisciplinarity. And so, Haidt really focuses on the social psychology in many ways. And then other people come from the neuroscience of meditation. I think we're at a point, and that's another area where Ananda Ashram and the community like this can bring such people together, because the truth is, you need it all. I mean, if a child's going to get less fragile, then we need to be able to get them to put the cell phone down, of course, but we also need them to be able to step back and be mindful. So I think the more of those connections we can make, the better. And so, I mean, in some way that's obvious. All good things should go together. But a great question.
And then from Joy Goebel.
Yeah.
And I think she's asking a question that all of us here are wondering. Would there be any results or conclusions to share from the brain caps this weekend, or is it too early?
Yes. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Joy, because we talked about this at lunch. So here's the short summary. We have collected my wonderful RAs who just drove away, and I tried to text them, but the message failed. I wanted to bring them in and thank them, but I will thank them when I get back to New Haven. So we've collected, I don't know how many they ended up with, but at least 10 or more people doing this one experiment, and we probably need to do many others, but it was a good start. Now, we're going to do some first pass analysis. This was a study, for those of you who participated, and for those who didn't, I'll tell you. And I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but we put the cap on and we're measuring the brain activity using something closer to MRI than to EEG, but it still gives us information about where things are in the brain. And at the beginning, we get a baseline measure of the way your brain networks are communicating, this connectivity. And then we had people in one of two conditions either they were listening to the Sanskrit or they were listening and repeating. So we would have liked to do both in the same person, but experiments have limitations. We were going to run enough people, so we have one group listening to Sanskrit and another one really chanting. And then we had them do 20 minutes of meditation, for those of you who did it, in which we can look at the meditation itself. We can compare chanting Sanskrit and its impact on the brain versus just hearing it. So what do you add when you actually produce it and hear it? How do those two different ways of starting the session spill over to the meditation state, to the connections that you form with the language system, with other parts of the brain? And then finally, we bring them in at the end. We sort of bring them back to that baseline test. And that's what people did. And we will be able to answer some questions, like we also asked everybody how many years you've been meditating, what were you doing while you were being scanned, and how good a meditation was it by your estimation, and how long have you been studying Sanskrit? So what we do with that is we look at the brain activity that is associated with Sanskrit, hearing or hearing plus saying. We then look at how that relates to meditation. We also look deeply at meditation over a long period and relate it to your experience, years of experience, how successful it was. And we're doing this in some similar ways with the project, not exactly the same, similar to what we're doing with the Parkinson's study with Sarah. Now, and then we will have all that data, and it's a lot of analysis, because those 20 minutes, all that brain cap was measuring. The first thing we're going to look for soon is, with the sample we have, does the data look like we got something important? Because in research, you run an experiment, sometimes it's like, you hit what do they call that thing? The
accelerator.
The jackpot. And other times you get the one lemon and whatever it is. Okay, so we'll see what the data look like, and we'll look at it very quickly. I think my colleague Naveen will help us. That will take a few weeks, but then if the data look like we're learning something important from this, and I hope we do, then we might need to run additional folks. And we're not going to bring it back to the ashram, but we'll run it in New Haven and do the same thing so that we have more statistical power for the study. So what we were estimating is that we should be able to report back, preliminarily I could get back to Shanta and the ashram with some summary of what we're seeing, and also whether we're increasing the study and expanding the study in some way. And then I would think probably if we do end up running additional conditions or people, that we would end up with something that I could report back by the end of the summer. So realistically, the end of the summer, we might have, and it won't be that we've magically solved the universe, but it will be something hopefully interesting and informative. Maybe at that Sanskrit weekend.
We'll have a session.
But just one thing that you didn't say is
Right.
that we had discussion about whether people read or not.
Right.
So the people who were both listening and chanting were not, had their eyes closed, right?
Right.
So
Right. So the next experiment would be, the natural next question would be, how does writing and reading, or immersing as they did this weekend in reading and writing, if we add that to the mix, and you now bring that motor thing that I was talking about, language learning is facilitated by the motor. Once we've done this preliminary study, how the Sanskrit chanting was affecting, we could ask the next question, how does the written form? How does the study of Devanagari? And then it just blossoms from there. I wish we could have done more in one study in one weekend, but I think we have a good start. But that's exactly the question, really, that, for example, we know that, and I've said this way too many times, but learning to write is very beneficial to the receptive and oral language system. So if we study the effect of Devanagari, it would probably be over a longer period, but we can definitely do that. We are already starting to look at the effects of chanting versus just hearing. But the next step would be writing and bringing that in, I think.
I was just thinking about the reading. Because,
Yeah, of course.
Because if somebody is repeating something where they have to catch it all with their ear,
Right.
because when we were preparing the files, we were trying to make it brain dead easy.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure we nailed that piece. So the other thing would be, is there less anxiety when you get to read?
There
And
is,
you know,
yeah.
and-
So we debated this, Naveen and I, and Sarah, the three of us talked about this. We debated, whether to have the visual presentation. The reason we didn't, I'll just make it brief. The reason we didn't in this first study is because the 20 minutes of meditation, there's no vision. So we were kind of looking at sort of a continuous state. And when you read things, I can tell you, studying the reading brain, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And it's all interesting, but maybe not what we wanted to see this time. Maybe next time. So anyway, sorry.
So do we have just a way to, for anybody who wants to know, is there a list from this weekend in particular that
Right.
we can then email out that if there's going to be a Zoom discussion or anything, is that something that we want to make sure that we
We'll
have?
have to check into that. I'm hoping that when people registered,
Yes.
at least,
Yes.
that they had to give an email, I
Right.
hope.
Good. So
But
if we,
we're
as long as we
talking to
have
the-
that,
We're talking to the group at large right now, including the people who are not in the room. Feel free to write an email about anything you want to me at shantabalkan@gmail.com. We'll collate all of the information that we're getting, whatever your questions might be going forward, and we'll find a path for
Yeah.
where we want to go. I just want to say that about maybe 7 years ago, I stepped down from the board of directors here, and I was really worried about doing that. I was feeling like I was losing identity by doing it. Within 2 or 3 days, I don't know how it happened, I feel like Guruji was behind it, but I had a conversation with Bharti, and she said, would you think about becoming the program development committee head? And before I could say yes, this force came out of my lungs like I never had before and said yes before I could even form the word yes. And I have to say, I found,
microphone.
I think, another level of my dharma, like to bring groups like this together. And I think, and I don't want to end the conversation right now, but I just wanted to get it in before I lost my voice, but I think this is an amazing, not only circle coming back to Guruji's beautiful teaching of science and Sanskrit, but now here we are, sitting with you two in the realm of science and how to figure out the brain and how it works. and bringing the Sanskrit together, because this ashram is on the map for Sanskrit.
Right.
And Guruji must be so happy right now.
There he is. So, thank you. So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just have a direct comment that in answer to Chaitanya's question and also the reading that would happen, but in answer to Chaitanya's question, I want to hear more from all of you, your key takeaways of what resonated with you most, much like Scott was able to share with us, and Chaitanya also, just anything that comes to mind that resonated with you gives some sort of positive feedback to me that's some sort of truth or some sort of potent part of what we discussed today, because there's been so many. So I want to encourage anybody to just share, not even questions, but just some feedback, because that to me, that's valuable.
That's great. Yeah.
But I'm so glad that, Shanta, that you read that paragraph, because of the discussions that we had so far, from my takeaway, is that first we were deciding whether Sanskrit is different vibrationally or grammatically from other languages, and talking with Ken, it doesn't seem that way, but we came to the conclusion that when we add the meaning or how Sanskrit opens access to these texts, that gives it, that elevates the impact it has on the body. But what Shanta wrote about, Guruji wrote that Sanskrit is the language of unity. And I can see that because I see how that's instructed in the Vedas and the ancient Sanskrit texts. But you also said that just the act of being exposed to it and listening and chanting and saying it will start to bring an individual into a physical peace. And to me, that's the coherence, the peace, the contentment, the physiology changes, that there is some element that there's something inherent in the exposure to the Sanskrit language that can affect the physiology in this way. So that's my takeaway, that it's both the meaning we have to study, but also just we have to figure out more, even among other individuals, how it can bring people to a piece of contentment.
Guruji used to say, and then we're going to have you come up.
Yes, another question. There's a couple questions.
Every Sanskrit sound, and he was specifically pointing to Sanskrit sound.
Yes.
The Sanskrit sound is so developed by the physics of the mouth, the physics, and the brain is right there. But he used to say that for every Sanskrit sound you make, it goes into your sound bank account. And that sound bank account will provide you more dividends than any other bank account you might have. It sounds a little absurd, but I feel like when he was saying it a couple different times, I was kind of getting goosebumps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The only other thing I would add, and Gina, please come up, just very briefly, we talked a lot, Sarah and I, about, what do we think is the next question about why Sanskrit does the good things that it does? And there are hypotheses that you can set about, as she suggested, that maybe it's the connection to these vastly important teachings that is one thing. But then there's the phonetics that Bharati and it teach the grammar, the sounds. All of those can be studied, I think. Is there something about this immersion relative to other new languages that are also, from a linguistic point of view, they all share the ability to be what is called generative. So you can do anything with them. And all languages have even sign. So then the question is, to the specialness, is it the connection that it came from such a deep spiritual culture? But how is that connection made? And we had some interesting conversations, and I know that would be an interesting area for dialogue with linguists, with Sanskrit specialists, as we have here, with scientists who could easily turn some of those hypotheses into experiments. I mean, we can research this, but I think it's something we should do.
And I want to emphasize what Indira's point about actually bringing in interfaith leaders as well. I was recently giving a book called Jewish Meditation, and I was surprised that just so many of the same concepts had previously been found, but has been lost from the traditions. So I'm sure that we would also find some answers that way too.
Because right, all of the ancient languages that were tied to spirituality.
Yeah.
What do they, what do they have and what do they share? It's a fascinating question, and there are a lot of perspectives. It's not an easy answer. It's a tough question. Go ahead, Gina.
What you said was the perfect lead into what I was also going to ask about, or maybe just comment on.
Sure.
More, Mike.
It's hard. I'm going to eat
Seth,
it.
Seth,
If
is
I
it
can
on?
get any closer.
Seth, is her mic on? Yeah? Okay.
It's on, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are a couple of things that I was connecting in my head, and also my own experience. So I think I want to first say that this place that offers the Sanskrit teachings as a gift and these teachers, I'm so grateful for. So it's wonderful and it's amazing. And Sanskrit, I agree, is a valuable language, and it's the root of my lineage of Jain. There's a lot of Jainism in Sanskrit, as well as the more local language at the time, Prakrit, and of course the vast and diverse and wonderful teachings of Hinduism. Also, though, if we think about it in terms of acceptability in an interfaith setting, I mean, I think it's a little telling that what the quote that you read was to an Indian audience. I don't know that would go over so well when you have people from different traditions. And there is mysticism in Jewish traditions and in Christianity.
Right.
Christian was just commenting to me, what if you had enough subjects that you could actually study someone doing Gregorian chanting? I mean, this is what we think of. There's probably something more modern as well. What if you could, have someone doing some other kind of Buddhist meditation? I mean, they've done metta meditation, but some other kinds of that?
Sure.
I don't know, Jain chanting, maybe not in Sanskrit, like just to untangle that a little bit. Islam, Sufi. I mean, like you could have a very diverse kind of study. And is it, like you were saying, is it connected to teachings that are wisdom traditions, not only in our Indian, through lineage, but also others? Are they all connected in some way, way back? Maybe they are. But I just think practically, especially the climates that we live in, where there's so much polarization and politicization about identity, I don't think it's something that mainstream, at least Americans, will accept. Like, they're rebelling against yoga being tied to its Hindu roots. In parts of the South, you have to present it as secular. Mindfulness has to be presented as secular.
Yeah, secular.
So it just seems like there's an opportunity there.
There is I agree.
No, I completely agree, and we're only speaking from the perspective of what lineage did we come through? Well, it was this one that Guruji brought us, but we want to be open to all of them. We don't want to limit this to just our thing.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that has really given Sanskrit a bad rep has been some of the elitist tradition attached to it. But the way I look at it is that was not how our guru presented things. That's first and foremost. And I mean, I tell this story often about going with him to an Indian family's house where he did fire ceremony and blessed the house. And I would think I was 17 years old, and there was this middle-aged Indian man saying, "Do you teach the Gayatri Mantra to women?" Like, he didn't think it was a good idea. And that wasn't Guruji. So I think there's two sides of it. When we first came into this life, I referred to the ecumenical retreat I went to, but also Guruji had Shanta be the representative of our ashram to, what was it called?
Meeting of the Ways. Meeting of the Ways.
It was an interfaith group in San Francisco where there were Sufis. There were different kinds of Buddhists. So that was much more common in the 70s. But I think the challenge we have, I would view it as two tracks. That the world needs more tools for meditation, not less. And maybe you evaluate each one scientifically. That's fantastic. So I'm not in any way trying to say that Sanskrit is the only tool for meditation or anti-anxiety, anti-depression, whatever. It has been good for me. And I think those of us who have had this training need to offer it to the world, and the right people will pick it up.
Right.
And it is in the age we're living in, where there's so much religious polarization, that this ashram that was our guru's tradition was unity. One of the papers that was put out, unity in diversity. So we need to have diverse traditions feel their unity, and that's like the mystical side of, somebody compared many years ago like an orange, that the mystical sides of all religion were the top of the orange, where the slices met. I don't know if anybody still talks that way, but I thought it was a lovely imagery, because it was like the religions were different pieces, but they came together in the mystical side.
Right.
And I do think we need to not say this is the only way, but these two scientists, they're not going there.
And science becomes a universal language too. That's the one way to help spread and resist, because that's what.
That's right.
Just one other thing about that thought about what are we trying to do here. In 2011, Mount Madonna Institute in California, which is very fabulously well known for Ayurveda and so many things, they came to Indira and I. They were having trouble with their Sanskrit teachers there because Baba Haridas insisted that Sanskrit be a part of their Ayurvedic college. They went through 6 or 8 teachers, one after the other, because they were bringing the university-style Sanskrit to students, some of whom didn't know what Sanskrit was. They interviewed us. We came and we brought Guruji-style Sanskrit. And here's a room full of 40 people, all different nationalities, all different religions. And I go to the head of the Ayurveda school and say, how are we supposed to teach to these 40 people? Ranging all the way from not understanding even what Sanskrit is to Indians who have Devanagari background. She said, just make them happy.
Right.
Guruji brought Sanskrit to us partly to make us happy. That's what's happened to everybody in this room who has studied with whether you study with Guruji or not, you're coming to this ashram, it's going to make you happy. The other byproduct of this, and I only speak because we were bringing the Sanskrit part. We weren't bringing another religion part or another language part. This was our experience. So many students started coming up to me after class or emailing me. I would mention that I came here as a 22-year-old suicidal young man. And that opened the door for hundreds of those students to come to me and say, I really appreciated your vulnerability in bringing that up. And I have tremendous trauma. And I was not only attracted to Mount Madonna College of Ayurveda, but because they were studying Sanskrit and knowing that Sanskrit can help with my trauma. So we're all mixed up in the science.
I would just make, it's hard to follow that heartfelt comment. Just one thing I think I would put on the table, which is from the point of view of the structure of the language and the linguistics and the comparability and the etymology, where it comes from, and the other questions, there are a lot of interesting scientific or philosophic and psychological linguistic questions that we could answer about what makes it unique. And there are claims, as you've probably all read, that from people who do AI and a lot of complex computer programming, that Sanskrit is a great language to use because it has these certain elements. I don't really know of any data on this. I just know that the claim is made by people who understand those machines. In some way, if you ask me whether I want to invest my time in comparing Sanskrit to other languages to see whether it has unique generative properties or structures or a particularly complex phonology that makes it well suited to meditation, I could do it, but I'm with you. I'm less interested in knowing whether it's special. It's special to us, and it's special to meditation. And it does open, as Sarah said, the doors to understanding the ancient knowledge. So in some ways, I'd rather do research not on whether Sanskrit's special, and it might well be, but why it works and does what it does and how we can use it in ways that we use it now. What are some of the ways that understanding the diversity of the brain can help us use it better, use it differently, use it at younger ages, use it as a tool in clinical work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a great question, and I raised it, I suppose, about, not because that's not why it's a great question, but because I think it's really interesting that, you know, there are these linguistic debates. Bharati and I have sat at lunch other times talking about languages and what's special and what's not. I think it's a great question. But I do think we know that it, as Dr. Mishra said in that quote, that how effective it can be, how powerful it can be to the meditation. And now the question is not proving it, but rather understanding it so that we can use it in more complex and diverse situations. How do we introduce it to children? How do we introduce it to, you know, people with no bilingual, et cetera, et cetera? So I think we could do a lot in the line we started here to understand the psychological and spiritual benefits of Sanskrit, which I think we all acknowledge, and not so much get caught up in interesting questions from the point of view of linguistics. Although that, you know, as I said, we could do a little bit of everything, but I personally, I want to know why Sanskrit has such a powerful effect and what I can do with it, and I think that's where I want to go.
Well, to that end, thank you, Paras, and Kamlakant, we'll get to you in a second.
Yeah, sorry, Kamlakant.
Guruji spent more than 2 decades with us, training us in Sanskrit, and pronouncing, doing the grammar, chanting the verbs and the nouns. He spent a lot of time doing this. Why would he do that?
Right.
Why would this amazing human being spend all that time with a relatively small group of people? We're not talking about tens of thousands of people like so many teachers have, which is great. But why did he take this much time out of his life to do that for us here? Not only here, but on the West Coast ashram as well, and other places.
Right.
There's something about why he would do that.
Exactly.
That attracts me.
Exactly. And it reminds me of your story of the boy and his response to the Sanskrit immersion. It's a beautiful way to start thinking about it, I think. Kamlakant.
So before Shant brought that aspect of academia up, I just was going to ask about, so Guruji introduced Sanskrit as the science of vibration. So, you know, and his program was all about cosmic consciousness and training us all how to have an experience of cosmic consciousness or a glimpse of it. And so, again, like if you go to academia, I don't think they're training you on Sanskrit for vibration and cosmic consciousness. Exactly. You would know better. And I don't really know, other than from Guruji, about anybody talking about Sanskrit as the science of vibration. And maybe the two of you can share. Is this just at the ashram that we call it the Sanskrit, the science of vibration, or is this something that Guruji realized, that this is the science of vibration, or is this something that is in the academia?
He was so brilliant on so many levels, beyond the body and mind, which he talked about a lot. And he used to talk about Sanskrit as the washing machine of the mind. How do you get there?
Yeah.
I mean, how does he come to say that? There's some powerful force coming out of his body, and when you sat near him, his voice was electric. You can chant Sanskrit and hear the electricity in it, but when he did it, it's like, I need a little shield. I need a little protection from that power. But I think she could speak to what she experienced with wonderful Dr. Goldman at Berkeley.
At Berkeley,
and whether you heard the washing machine of the mind and all these things there.
I was privileged to study Sanskrit with Professor Robert Goldman at UC Berkeley, who is a fantastic scholar. He's one of rare Western people who is completely fluent in Sanskrit. He didn't talk about vibration, but he taught poetry at a deep, profound level. And I think one of the things that's special about this ashram that we need to notice every now and then, and it's, as I get older, I see more and more Guruji's wisdom that I didn't see when I was young. But we have an East-West school of music. We have an East-West school of dance. So there, he understood also the value that art can play in transformation. Mm-hmm. So I think I would say what I saw at the academic level was that poetry was taught at a very high level, and subtleties of Sanskrit translation were done beautifully. I also have to add that our friend Deven Patel, who is a professor at Penn, we went and visited one of his classes this winter, and he was teaching Yoga Sutras at the same time, reading various people's translation of the Yoga Sutras. He was teaching Buddhist style, secular meditation, you could say, a fantastic technique, and tying it to the text. So that is our Deven, and he's definitely in academia, but he's also a special man. So as far as the science of vibration, I think the clearest sense I've gotten of that, and I've heard this phrase now for more than half a century, but Shanta's been teaching at the Ayurveda school at Mount Madonna, and he's been talking about nadam to students and people who've been meditating for decades, some of them, and studied with lots of different teachers, have never heard that inner sound talked about. So, I mean, the whole science of vibration thing, I'm not going to, that's a whole separate talk on itself, and we would want to involve Bharati and many other teachers here to comment on. But just to try to answer the question, I would say I definitely didn't get that at Berkeley. The philosophy was taught brilliantly because there was very high quality scholars there. And the poetry gave a real sense of what we call bhava, emotional connection, because there were people there who were very good at that, and that is one aspect of uniting us, which we see here with both music and dance.
Right, that's a great point.
Guruji talked about crossing bridges all the time, making sure that we're accepting every culture, every religion, every time. Tara, come on.
Pull it down, I think, towards you.
Does it go down?
It must be.
This way, yes.
Oh, yeah, lean it. It should be down.
Oh boy.
Let me try.
I just want to thank all of you. This is really wonderful. And my takeaway, because my background is working with kids, is how can we bring this to children? And it's not in this kind of arena, but kids need to move and learn through soma, through the body.
Talk in the microphone.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So anyone else who's interested in sharing Sanskrit with kids and how maybe they could do the I am dance with it, or Kathak dance, beating out the alphabet, I don't know, but I certainly want to research that myself and work on meditation with the children.
Yeah.
So I'd love to work with you.
Yes, Sarah.
Tara, you did a beautiful job teaching Sanskrit, a Sanskrit mantra, 2 weeks ago. And that's I haven't had the chance to give you feedback, but you should be the teacher of Sanskrit. We had a kids program 2 weeks ago here, and Tara taught the mantra Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. But I thought that's what we do. We start small with meaning, have them chant it.
One thing I didn't do, which I feel really needs to be done, is to have them dance with
Move,
it.
yeah.
To use their whole body. There's so many kids right now that are labeled ADHD and,
Exactly.
have anxiety, and they need to move their bodies. So to bring that in, I didn't do
well, we
that.
could
But
do that.
thank you for the feedback.
And then we chanted it also. We had the harmonium, and actually the kids had
Yeah.
the chance to come and sing it themselves into the microphone.
And I would just add my thanks to, I think, Tara and Indira and Sarah.
And there was Gabby and Leela.
And Gabby and
Senya
Leela
yeah.
for opening this door, because we've been talking for a long time about getting families and kids in, especially, those are the brains, I mean, just to use a neuro term, those brains are like extremely plastic and ready to go, and they struggle. This anxiety epidemic we talked about is hitting 20 to 29 quite strong, and young kids
adolescents,
quite strong.
definitely. Adolescents.
And so we have an opportunity, and this gets to Chaitanya's question about what we can do as an ashram. I think our ability, and they've now, you guys have done it and started it, but I think we could have more focus on children. And because we have the research ties now with our group and others, we could combine it in some interesting ways. And I hope that's what we do next.
Yeah, I think if we don't support the kids, we're not doing our job.
Right. Seth, were there any other online at this point? And this is pretty good. We're coming close to the final part. But Seth, anything?
One more question
From Joy, okay.
I think this has been touched on in other ways, but I'll read her question. Might be interesting to explore collaborations between the harmonics of Sanskrit, like the healing sounds of the temples of India. Maybe correlation with music therapists, people who went to the temple to be healed. May be difficult to identify and quantify the variables.
Yeah. But I think that's a great idea. The only thing I would say to, because chanting of, there was a part of the presentation that we did at the Sanskrit weekend that I didn't cover this time, which was some of the brain overlap between music and language. And we did, we had some presentation on that at that meeting last year. And because chanting sort of bridges those two in so many ways. There is research, like for children who struggle with language, they refer to as language-based learning difficulties. These are kids that I tend to study. There is some research that suggests that music immersion can have a transfer to some of the language things that kids are struggling with, and it makes sense. We need a lot more of that research, but there are some good labs, one in Northwestern, one in Cambridge, in England, that have done that kind of work. And I think we could really benefit from focusing on the aspects of Sanskrit chanting that are essentially overlapping with the brain areas for music, because since those overlap in interesting ways with language, it's possible to see a way into language for children, and therefore, and also into emotional state, which music has evolved to trigger. I think there's a lot we can do there, but I don't know. There's nothing definitive in that area. It's a provocative new field, but we need a lot more research, to my mind. Yeah.
Well, I find myself in the interesting position of simultaneously wanting to say it's not all chanting and wanting to point out that this oral tradition, a lot of was handed down via chanting.
Right.
Now,
Right.
somebody told me, I was mentioning how neuroanatomy teacher at Berkeley, she made all this huge point about it, was the tracks that ran left-right that she thought were very cool. This is decades ago, and who knows?
Corpus callosum, I
Huh?
suppose. The corpus
Not
callosum.
just the corpus callosum, but there was one in the front and one in the back, and I don't remember. there was one brain in our lab that didn't have a corpus callosum,
Mm-hmm.
and it was pointed out like how much thicker the other tracks were
Mm-hmm.
to compensate. But somebody told me decades ago that music had that connectivity because one side of the brain did more, did one aspect, and like words did the other. So obviously a muddled question,
Yeah.
but
I make a quick, if you want to talk about the bihemispheric connectivity, I would just mention that there has always been this idea that, or a kind of a popular understanding that our spoken language abilities, receptive and expressive, are more in the left hemisphere. And that, that leaves the right hemisphere free to focus on longer time scales and harmonies and things. So there is research, but it's of course never simple as the pop psychology version, in that there are right hemisphere areas that are important for language, but there are more in the left, as in general for most neurologically normal people. But then the music and the language, in both hemispheres, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of integration. Which, however you want to define it, hemispheric or not, the biological machinery that we have that's so amazing for talking and listening, and the fact that music is even potentially more ancient than that, and has value in communication and socio-emotional state, it's not surprising that they have all of these rich connections wherever they occur. And one of the things, as I said, that we see in the educational world, but also in the anxiety, the world of child psychiatry, is the potential benefits of sound and of sound immersion. But there are differences, and they're not black and white. But of course, music does find its way into the language brain in ways that can be very beneficial. I think that's a fair statement.
She's talking about the harmonics of the vowels.
So the harmonics. I mean, we don't want to go into but if you think about the signal of sounds, you have the phonemes, the consonants and vowels, and they're acoustically. What makes a ba or a da is taking place in a really short period of time. And there's a lot, the left hemisphere is really good at small spatiotemporal analysis, like things that change fast. So if you're producing a ba, there's all the movements of the tongue and all that stuff, and it's all taking place in a very short time scale. And there's a lot of populations of neurons in the left that are really good at that. And so that's, in some ways, one theory is language tends to gravitate at the level of receptive. But when I'm talking and I say the following sentence, "You went to the park today?" versus "You went to the park today." You know the difference because of the prosody. And these are spectral and temporal characteristics that are over longer periods. It's a whole sentence. This is called the envelope or the prosody. And it turns out that there are a lot of areas in the right hemisphere that are really good for that in language. That's why it's complicated. So, and I better stop before I go into psycholinguistics, but it is interesting.
So you were talking about when two people are talking with each other.
Yeah,
and
entrainment.
Their brains are starting to really work together in my own limited way of talking about it.
Right.
Well, about, I would say, a year and a half ago, I think Indra and myself and Jayashri and Paras were in the dining room, and the topic of Sanskrit brain tracking idea came up. And I swear, I had sparks, like that slide that showed the
lighting up.
The lighting, yeah. The lighting.
I had that in my head just by the topic coming up. I felt like this is something really important.
Right.
And we continue to talk about it, and it continued to happen, and it must continue to grow. And I'm so happy that you brought Sarah, who
Amazing.
I hardly knew before. And it's such a privilege to have you
Thank you for including me.
with
Yeah,
this.
great.
And we just really want to expand this in some proper way that doesn't exclude anybody.
Right. I'm and the same as I said before from Jayshree and I and Sarah and all of us for the two of you for leading us in this direction. I mean, it feels.
Yeah.
Well, there, I kind of looking at his picture, and it really feels like a good way to do seva for the ashram in some way. So.
I know that there's pizza coming.
Yeah, and I think Seth, we're pretty close to that. Oh, sorry,
I don't
go
think
ahead.
it's pizza, it's a dinner.
No, I think Kari
Is
is,
cooking.
which means everybody's going to run down there right away because it's always great. Go, Seth. Is there anything else you want?
We'll buy you a pizza for all your work, Seth.
Okay, and is there anything? So maybe I'll start to close it out.
You can close out.
I have
You
this.
close out.
and then we should all make some final comments. So my comments are, again, thank you to everybody and to everyone in the audience. And these were great questions, online and in person. They're really stimulating and they're really thoughtful. And again, I keep coming back to Chaitanya's question of how can we help? And I really do think that this was also, among everything else it was this weekend, it was also a test. Can we bring the darn equipment? Can we do this? Thanks to Naren and Deepak for letting us use the room, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that this was a good conclusion to this test. And it's clear that with a group of serious meditators and students of the path, that we can do a lot of good work with science. And so I just want to say I look forward. I probably speak from my two RAs, Virginia and Gladys, who I hope had a great weekend. I think they did, but they were busy. I know they at least got one chance to go swimming. But for all of us in our lab, and now Sarah is a part of that lab, we're all working together. I want to say that I'm really interested in going further, and if there's more things that we can bring from our toolkits, as Sarah said, and bring them to these questions, I'm always going to be here and bringing my gang, to work on this together. So thank you. So that's my final comment. Sarah, do you want to have
just thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this dialogue. I think it's just meaningful when we talk about the importance of the meaning behind the Sanskrit language. It's true for our work that that when we have meaning behind our work, then it takes us to a whole new level. It becomes our path. So, I'm in. You know where to find me.
I occasionally or sometimes frequently click on things that show up in my Google News feed, articles about neuroscience. Though I'm trying to read less news in general lately, but still some of those catch me. But this is an incredible privilege we have had to have people who have not only done research, read research, but also been in a position to criticize research because they've really deeply invested in having research be at the highest quality. So we've all been just incredibly blessed with these lectures.
Thank you.
Wait.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Just for those of you who are watching at home and also those of you present here, in just a few days we're going to be celebrating our 60th anniversary, the convocation, July 3rd through July 6th. We have a concert with Steve Gorn and Naren on July 3rd at 8 p.m. right here at Blue Sky Center, live streaming, Facebook and YouTube. July 4th, Deepak will be performing a North Indian classical concert. July 5th, we have Kathak dancing, I believe. No, Arjun and Naren,
Yeah.
sitar
Oh,
and
wow.
tabla. world-class musicians. It's going to be unbelievable. And then on the 6th, we have Charkaji, amazing dancer and leading his Katak dance group right here in the Blue Sky Center, amongst many other activities here July 3rd through July 6th, many of which will be live streamed. So I hope to see you all here. I'd like to thank all of you, the organizers of this event. Everything was so well organized, and I'm sure everybody online and in person got a lot out of it. I know I did. I enjoyed working with all of you, and it's a privilege and an honor, so thank you very much.
And
Thank you
Seth,
to Seth.
thank you.
That's
Thank you to Seth so much. So should we go back?
I just want to say I sat by Seth during some of this, and I'm watching this guy. He's not just watching us. He's looking at, do we have connectivity? He's looking at, are the people online paying attention? Are we getting texts, emails from them? He's
our corpus callosum.
There you go.
He's checking the air conditioning. He's just all over the map, and
Yeah.
it's amazing what you did. And
Thank you, Seth. Okay, so now we should do our
All right,
ohms.
let's do 3 ohms, all of us together.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.